Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, people of all races, colors, and creeds, welcome back to the greatest show on earth, the Investigative Journal. I'm Greg Anthony, here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. The last few days I've been doing several shows on where is all that evil coming from, and there's a whole lot of evil in the world. Even President Trump said that at one of his recent rallies. So today I want to depart from that, and you know what I was doing in those shows. I was talking about some of the evil organizations that exist. One being the Jesuits, another I kind of call the Illuminati. You've heard that, and I gave you kind of a better look at really what it is, including the Jesuits in that, and as well as the Holy See we've been going over. So these are things you normally don't hear. If you just listen to mainstream news, if you just listen to your pastors on the pulpit today, even our Protestant pastors who are supposed to be protesting the Vatican, you'll see a whole different story. They're a benevolent group of people searching for good, helping those in need. Oh, there's a few bad apples. That's what these pedophilia law cases are. But don't worry about that. That'll be cleaned up. That's what you're going to get. And for that reason, I wanted to depart today and talk about something else. And let me tell you where I'm going to go with this. First of all, when you're a Catholic, you're taught to go to confession. And as a young boy, I remember many, many times going into the confessional and saying, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." My last confession was, 2 weeks ago, and I lied, I disobeyed my mother and father, I did this, I did that. Say 10 Hail Marys, son, and you're forgiven. Okay, well, they learn a lot about you, and those few priests in that, confessional, they know who you are. And so they get to know a little bit about your family. But if you take it a little farther, after I started to understand what the Vatican Jesuit New World Order was all about, they use the confessional at higher levels to blackmail people, to get them on their side. And boy, they've done it over the course of hundreds of years. Has it gone on today? Of course it goes on today. And what I wanted to get at today was about in 2007, 8, and 9, I think I wrote a number of articles called Confession to the Jesuits. And they all had numbers, like number 1, number 2. And I'm looking at one I did called number 37. And it says Jesuit treachery needs to be updated. And the reason somebody asked me, well, why'd you coin that confession to the Jesuits? And I said, well, I wanted to give them a little taste of their own medicine. Tell them what I should have told them years ago when I entered that confessional, when I didn't know anything. So I'm going to get to that in a minute. And this one has to do with a statement I made yesterday. And that was that it was estimated over the course of centuries, there's been over 6,000 to 7,000 books written about Jesuit treachery, Vatican treachery. But where have they all gone today? So I picked up Confession to the Jesuits number 37 that deals with that issue, and I'll get to that in a minute. But on this topic of where does this information go, how come you do not hear this in the mainstream, either on the left-wing stations called CNN, MSNBC, etc., ABC, NBC, or on the right wing centered around Fox News? That's where most people are getting their cable news today. So we're not going to talk about the internet, but look at what's happened really. As far back as I can remember, when I decided I wanted to be a journalist in college, became editor of my student newspaper, I went into it kind of glossy-eyed with this idealistic look that the freedom of the press, newspapers especially, not TV stations, but newspapers. Back then there were still newspapers, there was no internet. Where would America turn to get the truth, to understand what was going on? And even back then, in the 70s and 80s, you could see that American newspapers still agreed on this one premise, that the news would be covered objectively on the news pages, and then if you wanted to go to opinion, you would go to the editorial page. So there was this idea that all the facts should be brought out, and then people should be able to make up their own mind, right? And then a newspaper, of course, had the opportunity, and if you were an editorial writer, to take a position on local candidates, on other issues, whether it be abortion, anti-abortion, etc. So that's the way it was for a while. And although the mainstream news has always been tainted, I've never seen it be the way it is today. It's that whole maxim of get the news and let people decide is gone, because most newspapers now mix their opinions in the news pages, and you're getting what Trump rightly called a lot of fake news, a lot of things that aren't true. So what does that tell you? What has happened really is that the American media has turned a blind eye to facts. And what they're talking about here is that if you're on the right wing, you're going to go to certain places to get your news, to get that area, get that side. And if you're on the left wing, you go to the other side. Now, unfortunately, most of the newspapers and media outlets are left wing. And that's the way it's always been. A bit liberal, right? And I can remember, even back when Reagan was president, I remember when Ronald Reagan became president, I was a journalist trying to be objective, but hell, I was more on of a liberal side. I had no idea what was going on in the Vatican and what was really going on in what's called the Hegelian dialectic, whereas the left and the right really work together at the top levels, and they fight against one another. Their opinions are constantly clashing, causing chaos. And what happens is the synthesis is that the powers that be at the top, including the Vatican-led New World Order that we talk about here, get their way. And that's been going on for years. So I remember when I first went to Italy in the early 80s, I noticed a difference in the way journalism was handled there. They do it exactly back then the way it is done here today. There was a paper for the Christian Democrats. There was a paper for the fascists. There was a paper for the conservatives, for the moderate liberals. So each one had their own little paper they went to, and that's how the news was given to the people in Italy. And I remember I used to have to translate that, so I would go to certain papers to get different viewpoints, and you would get totally different viewpoints. Let me give you an example. When Reagan was making his first visit to Rome, about 10 days before that, there was an explosion in the American newspaper that I worked at, and I was about 10 seconds away from getting blown away, and I've gotten into facts on that and told you that many times. But I was looking how that story was covered on the different Italian newspapers, and it was completely opposite. One, the Christian Democrats said it was this. Then the fascists said, no, it was an inside job done by the CIA, and so on and on and on it went. And really, it was depending on who you listened to where you got these distorted facts. It wasn't covered just basically, this is, of course, in the American coverage, it was basically back then, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. I did check into it because I was almost killed, and I did find out that the American newspaper was funded by the CIA, and that led me to start looking at the Vatican, and I happened to be there during the Vatican Bank scandal. And so I saw a whole different idea of really who is the power structure of this New World Order that we talk about, and it goes right to the footsteps of Rome and the Jesuits, and I learned that when I was there. So, of course, now that I come back and I look at what's going on here, the question of why don't you hear this story is basically very simple. They control the media, they control Hollywood, they control the information that goes out to people, and they've chosen, of course, to protect themselves. They can't tell you their hidden agenda. And what is it? It's simply from the beginning of this country till now, a slow takeover to where they will have total control, and the socialism you're hearing now will eventually transform America into a different country. And the only way to get to that is now you're seeing this chaos. You're seeing the newspapers, you're seeing the radio stations divide themselves into this Hegelian dialectic left and right struggle. But at the top, you're obviously seeing that they're going to benefit one way or the other here. And the powers that be will as well. It isn't going to be the American people. And socialism is being brought here very systematically. Ask yourself a question. A year ago, you didn't hear anything about it. Congress now is pushing socialism. The Democratic candidates are pushing it. And what does that tell you? That tells you there's something behind the scenes that has planned all this. And all of a sudden, you get a guy like Trump, who was selected maybe 10 years ago to be president. And what is he doing? He's ramping up the America First, pumping money into the military, bringing America's supposed economy to the best shape it's ever been. But there's a reason for that, because it's all going to crumble one day, and the elite now are cashing in on it, I think. But they're also showing America its true colors. We have many people on the right, and we have half the other people in America on the left. And boy, I tell you what, they don't get along anymore, or they basically can't even listen to each other. That's why if you're a left-winger, you'll turn on Fox for 2 minutes and start to throw up. And if you're a right-winger, you can't listen to CNN more than 10 seconds. That is no way for a healthy country to survive. And it is orchestrated. So why don't you hear of all this? Well, in the mainstream, we know that people even on the right wing, for example, if you think there's freedom of the press, because the right-wing journalists now are all going, oh, look at this. There is no freedom because of, look at what all of these left-wingers are doing. We can't get our message out. And the left wing is calling the right wing a bunch of lunatics, conspiracy theorists. So you have this battle going on. But the real key is that none of them want to talk about this story, and they're in agreement on this. They're also in agreement on many other things. How Kennedy was killed, how Lincoln was killed, an agreement on 9/11, Oklahoma City, Ruby Ridge, many other things they all agree upon. They also agree upon, one of the more ridiculous things, is the Antarctica Treaty. Has anybody really ever thought about this? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. That you have a continent, they say, that you can't go on. Okay, back in the 50s, there was a treaty of more than 60 to 70 countries that made it illegal for people to research and to travel there and to see really what's going on. Why? They're hiding something. Now, what they're hiding, we'll get into on other shows. And that has to do with exactly what do we live on? Can you believe what NASA says? Oh, come on. This goes real deep, and I'm not afraid to deal with it. Also, so we get back to journalism. So now all of a sudden, people are confused. Well, I can't get the truth anymore on the mainstream, so they float themselves to the alternative media, the internet. And basically, my path is the same. I realized after being in the Vatican, working there, in Rome, that when I came back, nothing was the same anymore. That there was no freedom of speech. This story is hidden. And I started researching it and looking for people that talked about it, and it was an amazing story back when this started, because I found there is a small group of people that talk about it, but they're persecuted and called conspiracy theorists by the very people who are claiming there's no freedom of speech. So I said, well, the only way to go is this new internet. Everybody's talking. And so As a naive journalist, I got my radio show on some of these stations, like Republic Broadcasting Network, Genesis, GCN. And what I started to find out was that there was a whole different kind of acceptance to a lot of information that the mainstream back in 2001 and 2002 with 9/11 weren't covering. But there was still a closure of this Vatican story. No one, even on the alternative, many, on these bigger alternative stations, there wasn't a lot of YouTube, there wasn't a lot of podcasts back then. And I learned the hard way that this message was not even wanted there. And then I started realizing that these same people that put their talking heads in the mainstream, that understand this story but are hiding it for the powers that be, they stuck these people in the alternative media. And they were doing their bidding there. And the story about the Vatican-led New World Order was considered crazy back then. Conspiracy. No one can talk about this. And I was kicked off a couple stations for it. And some of the bigger players back then, Alex Jones, who's still on, as well as John Stadmiller with Republic, I believe had a lot to do with keeping this story away. Back then, when I first started this story, Alex Jones said I was crazy. He basically said the Vatican, they're just poor priests, they have nothing to do with it. But as the years gone by, you've seen him now change his tune a little bit and create this idea that there's a satanic element in the Vatican, but the good side is going to win. And so he's kind of like morphed a little bit. But boy, I know his true colors and really who he works for. And I saw it the hard way because I worked right there. So this is going on the internet as well. And back then, it was clear to me that to get this story out would be very difficult, even on the alternative media. No, who's going to advertise? You're not going to get anybody to do this because they control the media, both in the alternative and on the mainstream. And can you imagine if a guy like Hannity or a guy like Jones actually came up and did the things we do here? They wouldn't be around. But since they work for the same people we talk about here, and I give them the benefit of the doubt, I know they have to know. I mean, you don't make this kind of millions of dollars and do this for a long time without knowing. But it's just sad because the real truth needs to be put on the table. And from the beginning, that's all I ever said. I said, listen, I don't want you to believe what I say here. I want you to understand, to get it on the table, because there are a lot of facts that tell you that this is a plausible theory. This is a plausible agenda that's never talked about. And these are the people behind the scenes pulling the strings, covering up what really is going on. And that's why you see the charade, the theatrics in Washington. I mean, it's only political theater. It's not a real world. I mean, these people, if you believe that actually either the left or the right are out for your own good, then boy, you need to do some research and study how they really operate. And it's pretty simple. Just think about this impeachment. And we don't have to go over all the facts. But it's a big distraction. And you know it. I mean, they don't have any facts to impeach him. And Trump is just a big, he's this guy that has been put there because I'll tell you, he's very entertaining and he's mobilizing the right wing against the left wing so that chaos can one day ensue. And in the meantime, they're figuring out how to take away your rights. First Amendment rights are pretty much gone. You can't even talk what I say here. That's considered, in most circles, hate speech, if you want to get down to it. If they really want to deal with it, that's the way they'll deal with it. Then secondly, they're already working to take away your guns. Look at what's going on in Virginia. And it appears that they're showing the American people that there is a two-tier justice system. They're right on this. And you're seeing that anybody that's associated with the Clintons or Biden or even the mayor, even the governor of Virginia and all these, they get away. They don't ever get charged. Look at what's going on. They're showing you blatantly that these James Comey, who used to be the FBI director, actually broke the law. But do you think that the Department of Justice under Trump ever is going to prosecute him? No. They're showing you this is basically over for the America First people. Now, if you're on the other side, they're showing you that they're putting people away left and right. Remember Paul Manafort? The guy did a few things. He was a white-collar criminal maybe, but they don't put him in solitary confinement. Or look at General Flynn. The guy was railroaded, but because he was a America First supporter, not a Clinton or Obama acolyte, he's facing a number of years in prison. I mean, it goes on and on and on, and you got to see it for what it really is. And let me tell you, I believe that if you don't start looking at this idea that we talk about here, and go back in history, you see the real problem is that I think they realize if they can get, how many people are going to go and read old books? They'll just say, oh, they used to be that way, but they've changed. That was the argument that anybody that debated me years ago would say. Well, yeah, okay, there was the Inquisition, but they've changed. Little do they know that they never change. They just do things differently. And if you were in Italy during the period I was, you would have seen it up close and personal. I'm telling you, there was a P2 Masonic Lodge, there was a Vatican bank scandal, and every cardinal known to man was involved. There were many, many cardinals who are openly, openly in their own circles, members of a Masonic Lodge, which, if you look at canon law, is merits excommunication. That never happens. So I started to open my eyes and understand that this needs to be discussed. Now, where it's going to go, how far you can get, you can start documenting the Jesuit Vatican ties to all of our government agencies, all of our top people, in whether it be in the executive, the in all three branches of government. And you can start listing names and showing their connections. And it seems to be something that always goes in one ear and out the other. But in no way should this story be overlooked. And what we're going to get at in the next half hour is this idea that maybe Jesuit treachery does need to be updated, even though they're doing the same old thing, so to speak. And what about these 6,000 books? Where have they gone? Why don't people really understand that? I'm looking at a book here, and this really is an interesting one. It's called The Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, written by Burke McCarty in the 1920s. And if you start reading this, you would start understanding that why didn't Robert Redford, when he did I think he did a movie on the assassination of Lincoln, why don't the historians ever look at what was said there? Why don't they go back to the court case when Lincoln represented Charles Chiniquy, a priest, who was falsely charged of rape by the Jesuits? And why don't they go back to some of the things he said? And it was well known the Vatican was involved putting a hit team together, not a lone gunman, to kill him. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, the greatest show on earth. People of all races, colors, and creeds are welcome. But remember this. I don't think you should be able to change your sex every day. You know, for example, one day you're a man, the next day you want to be a woman, so you go into the woman's bathroom. And you know, there's an interesting bill on the that's being presented now by a congressman from Florida on the right, a Republican, who wants to deal with the problem of women's athletics. Right now you're seeing that transgenders, people, men, who are declaring themselves a woman, even though they still have a man's body, can run in track and field and play all these women's sports. And it's really deteriorating women's sports because they can't compete. And women are left and right are coming up and saying, hey, this isn't fair. So he wants to introduce a bill to correct this. And it's a sad state of affairs when you have to introduce a law to keep men out of women's sports. And the very people, for example, on the left, that supposedly support women's rights are against it. Not one Democratic congressman is for it. Makes no sense. Well, maybe we need to look back at the worshiping of all these gods and goddesses that were both male and female. You know, the same sexes together. No difference between a man and a woman. The worshiping of those gods back in the old days is destroying really what God created, a man and a woman. And it's really sad when you look at what's going on. But anyway, getting off the point, I wanted to get to Confession to the Jesuits, number 37. And I said the reason I wrote a number of those articles years ago was kind of to stick it in their face, to give it back to them. Because all those times I sat in a confessional, I should have been saying, hey, you're the ones that should be professing your sins and asking for forgiveness. Not me. About all the garbage you guys have been involved with for hundreds of years. And if you say you don't know, then you should know. And you're guilty by association, is what I should have said. But anyway, so I wrote this one about the 6,000 books that have been somehow destroyed or not in existence. And over centuries, it has been said that more than to 7,000 books have been written about the Jesuit political intrigue and of course, their hidden satanic agenda. But many are missing or taken out of circulation, really to protect the guilty, is the way I look at it. It was estimated, Voltaire estimated, there had been about 6,000 to 7,000 books have been written about them, these Jesuits, and their devious involvement in worldwide political intrigue and assassination, which simply raises the question that we brought up yesterday: what number have we reached approximately 300 years later? In response to that question, there was a French writer named Adolf Michele said this. He said, "No matter. As long as there are Jesuits, books will have to be written against them. There's nothing new left to be said on their account, as their political deviousness and loyalty to the Pope really never changes. But new generations of readers come along every day, and the question has to be asked, will they read these old books?" Michele brings up a good point, one worthy of providing a reason to look into their masterful plan, the Jesuits' masterful plan to destroy this country. But another solid reason to research modern Jesuit intrigue is because most early books retracing their sordid and despicable history cannot be found anymore. The reason they are missing are only found in these specialized bookstores or hidden in your uncle's drawer to be uncovered after he's passed away. Because Jesuits and their loyal followers basically they control education. They control the historians in our major universities, have systematically taken them out of circulation and out of reach for most readers, so people don't know about it. However, there's still another very good reason to update Jesuit treachery and its role in the modern-day Vatican-led New World Order, told to us. And let's look at Edmond Paris a minute. He wrote a good book called The Secret History of the Jesuits. I'm sure they'll try to get rid of that soon. And he reminds us that Jesuits, and remember this, Alex, and all you guys in the alternative that said, oh, they changed. They never change. And they work today, says Paris, with the same torturous and tenacious methods which so often in the past set to work the defensive reflexes of nations and governments. Sons of Loyola are today, and may we say more than ever, the leading wind of the Vatican, as well if not better disguised than of old. But they remain the most eminent ultramontanes, the discreet but effective agents of the Holy See. Remember we discussed the Holy See throughout the world? The camouflaged champions of its politics, the secret army of the Pope, and the secret instigators and thinkers behind your world leaders. Trained by Jesuits, but later turning on them. Voltaire had this to say about their occupancy in France. I really must plume myself for having been the first to attack the Jesuits. Once France is purged of them, we can hope that people realize how shameful it is to be subject to that stupid power, the church, that set them up. Now, he said that, okay? He was trained by them, then came out against them. Now, the question was raised by some researchers that he actually never did stop working for them, because you see, they also get people to talk against them, even though they are Jesuit shills. So they want to control the narrative, correct? Lead you in the direction they want, even though you think that maybe Voltaire or people like, let me give you a name, Eric Phelps may be one. I'm not saying he is, but he's a good one to look at. He could be saying he hates the Jesuits, but actually is leading you into the direction they want, into this white supremacy idea, this idea he poses of having a state of only white people and a state of black people, which is ridiculous. How can anybody think that? So they do that. They'll put people in to anti-Jesuit groups who are actually pro-Jesuit. So it's a confusing world, isn't it, folks? You never know what's going on. But on the duty to speak out against these Jesuits and Vatican corruption, people in the U.S., linking leaders like Clinton, Bush, Trump, they're all there. I mean, do you think like Trump's the first president to not be controlled by them? Come on. He just the other day said that the Queen is the greatest thing since sliced bread. She does no wrongs, never done anything wrong. Oh my God. But people don't, they lack history, so they don't know. Bush, on every presidential candidate, the Congress and Senate, to the Pope's control. There's a guy I used to have on my show. He does some really great work. His name was Daryl Everhart. He, in fact, I let him do my show every now and then when I was taking a break. But he's done some really good research. It reminds us, and I wrote this down, first with a short prayer, and then an essay about the satanic influence of the Vatican and Jesuits upon the American culture. So let us pass over the prayer, and you can say that silently. And let us begin, he says, with this long quote by author Paul Blanchard. And Blanchard said this: probably no phase of our life is in greater need of candid discussion than the relationship of the Vatican, the Jesuits, to American institutions, and certainly no important factor in our life has been more consistently neglected by responsible writers and historians. Now, let me answer why. They really are there to cover it up, okay? The ones that are in the know. And the other ones basically are just shills, just working for the people in the know, and have no idea of what they're doing. And so a lot of their work is missing a lot of facts. Now, the Roman Catholic issue and the Vatican is not an easy subject to discuss objectively. Why? Because most Americans have automatically accepted their attitudes on the subject from their parents and their grandparents, and they do not want those attitudes disturbed. And the question, once you do disturb them and wake them up a little bit, they go, well, what can we do anyway? I don't want to talk about it. Well, they got you then, because you have to talk about it. Now, once these attitudes are disturbed, like I said, most people don't want that to happen. They are either Roman Catholic or they are not Roman Catholic. If they are Roman Catholic, they tend to view their own church with favor and its critics with suspicion. If they are not Roman Catholic, they tend to reverse the process and view all distinctively Roman Catholic policies with doubt. American Roman Catholics and American non-Roman Catholics both tend to leave the discussion of religious differences to denominational bigots. And many Americans have never had an opportunity to hear a reasoned and temperate discussion of the place of the Vatican and its power in our national life. The policy of mutual silence about religious differences is a reasonable policy in matters of personal faith. But when it comes to matters of political, medical, and educational principles, silence may be directly contrary to the public welfare. When a church attempts to control the judgment of its own people and of other people on foreign affairs, social hygiene, public education, and modern science, it must be reckoned with as an organ of political and cultural power. The Vatican Problem, as Blanchard sees it, is not a primary religious problem. It is an institutional and political problem. It is a matter of the use and abuse of power by an organization that is not only a church, but a state within a state, and a state above a state. There is no doubt the American Vatican Roman Catholic hierarchy has entered the political arena, and that is becoming more and more aggressive in extending the frontiers of their authority into the fields of medicine, education, foreign policy. You have it. Even NASA. The Roman Catholic Church tells Roman Catholic doctors, nurses, judges, teachers, and legislators what they can and cannot do in many of the controversial phases of their professional conduct, including journalists. It segregates children from the rest of the community in a separate school system and censors the cultural diet of these children. Nobody knows that better than me. It uses the political power of some 26 million official Roman Catholics, and maybe more, to do this. And remember, this was written, folks, in 1949. And do you think it's gotten any better? Of course not. To bring American foreign policies into line with Vatican temporal interests. These things should be taken about freely because they are too important to be ignored. It must be admitted that millions and millions of Americans are simply afraid to talk about them frankly and openly. Part of this reluctance to speak comes from fear of reprisals. The Roman Catholic hierarchy in this country, folks, and the Jesuits have great power as a pressure group, and no editor, politician, publisher, broadcast host, merchant, or motion picture producer can express defiance openly or publicize documented facts that we do here without risk of losing his future. But fear will not entirely explain the current silence on the Roman Catholic issue. Some of the reluctance of Americans to speak is due to a misunderstanding of the nature of tolerance. Tolerance should mean complete charity toward men and of all races and creeds, complete open-mindedness towards all ideas, and complete willingness to allow peaceful expression of conflicting views. This is what Americans think they mean when they say that they believe in tolerance. But folks, is that really what it is? If it was, this discussion could openly take place without reprisal. And listen, the more audience you reach, if you're in a position as a journalist or a news broadcaster, the more reprisals you will face. I know that because I faced them when I was doing this story years ago. And when they come to apply tolerance to the world of religion, however, they often forget its affirmative implications and fall back on the negative cliché. You should never criticize another man's religion. Now, that innocent-sounding doctrine, born of the noblest sentiments, is full of danger to the democratic way of life. That's why the Vatican, if you read their documents, they'll tell you their and the Jesuit Vatican political institution of choice is fascism. Because it's not, an openness is not what the democratic way of life was meant to hide. To hide things, to not be open, is full of danger. It ignores the duty of every good citizen to stand up for the truth in every field of thought. But you know, the way it is today, the truth cannot be found. There's so many different ideas. No one, if you have a media, if you have a papal hierarchy, if you have Protestant pastors, if you have your politicians, all living a fantasy, how can you ever get to the truth? It fails to take into account of the fact that a large part of what men call religion is also politics, social hygiene, and economics. Silence about another man's religion may mean acquiescence in second-rate medicine, inferior education, and anti-democratic government. Now, every American, Roman Catholic and non-Roman Catholic, has a duty to speak out about the Vatican Jesuit question. Because the issues involving go to the heart of our culture and our citizenship. Plain speaking on this question, okay, power in the U.S. involves many risks of bitterness, misunderstanding, and even fanaticism, but the risks of silence are even greater. Any critic of the policies of the Vatican, the Jesuits' hierarchy, must steel them himself to being called anti-Catholic. That's what you're going to be called, because it's part of the hierarchy's strategy. It's part of their strategy of defense to place that brand upon all of its opponents, and any critic must also reconcile himself to being called an enemy of the Catholic people, because the Catholic hierarchy constantly identifies clerical ambitions with the supposed wishes of its people. You know, it's important, therefore, to distinguish between the American Roman Catholic people and their papal Roman-controlled priests. Unfortunately, Catholic people in the United States are not citizens, but subjects in their own religious commonwealth. The secular as well as the religious policies of their church are made in papal Rome by an organization that is alien in spirit and control. The American Catholic people themselves have no representation of their own choosing in either their own local hierarchy or in the papal Roman Catholic high command, and they are compelled by every nature of their church's authoritarian structure to accept non-religious as well as religious policies that have been imposed upon them from abroad, the Vatican State, that is papal Rome. Now, fear of an authoritarian power justifies compromise with another, right? Especially when the compromise may be used to strengthen clerical fascism in many countries. Certainly in this country, the acceptance of any authoritarian control weakens the democratic spirit, and the encroachment upon the democratic way of life may be used as a precedent for others. Note, the well-documented history of Rome, and especially of its Jesuit order over the past 400 years, has been one of seeking political power and influence in nations, and also of subverting democratic governments. That is their history. Why is it overlooked? Is it any different here, what they're doing, when they started to infiltrate this country from its very origins? When many of the founding fathers are not even mentioned because they are basically tied to Rome, such as perhaps the Jesuit general at the time, Lorenzo Ricci, such as the very powerful Catholic family here, the Carrolls. Now, when you look at this, how can it be overlooked? When you see people on the right wing, one of the big cries of the right wing today is, the left wants to destroy this country. Well, yes, but do they really know who's behind everything? Maybe many don't, but you can be sure the people at the top do. And that's why I say they work together hand in glove. Now, also, the well-documented history of World War II shows that the Vatican Jesuits supported Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and other fascist regimes in Europe. They also helped some of the worst war criminals to escape punishment at the end of World War II through the infamous Vatican rat lines. Indeed, when I say their government of choice is fascism, I'm not exaggerating. They even tell you that. Now, Blanchard in his book gives examples of nations around the world that have suffered under a combination of state and Roman Catholic tyranny. So people say, well, they've changed. Well, I say this the third time in 3 days. Go to a place called concordatwatch.com, and you will see how they operate in over 200 countries without you even knowing how they operate, how they take money from either a dictator or take funds from governments to fund their own personal gain, to also fund schooling. It's amazing what they get away with. No other religious group does that. Why do they get favor here in this country over every other group? There have been many lawsuits brought back in the 60s. I can remember some by the Jewish organizations, by Protestants, saying that the Vatican was violating the rule of the separation of church and state. They're violating it today, and nobody says a word. And nobody thinks it's important, but it is. Because when you look at what they become, when they become a majority, okay, how becomes a majority in a certain nation or gains sufficient political power and influence, the Vatican then demands to be made the official state religion at the exclusion of all others, and that's what we call what they want in the future. Very simple, right? We say they want a fascist government, a one-world government, and what else? A one-world religion. Yes, they can have it in many different ways. What's the difference if you call yourself a Lutheran or a Protestant, but you don't practice it. And you actually are beholden to the Vatican. They don't care if you're an atheist, as long as you toe the line for the Pope. You don't have to call yourself a Roman Catholic to be one. And let's remember this. One of their biggest lies, and you'll hear it from any media person, they call Catholicism Christianity. It is not Christianity. And there are many facts that show that. Through their traditions, through all of their sacraments, and all of the things that are basically anti-biblical that Christians are supposed to adhere to. So how can they call themselves Christian? But they do. And that's how they get away with all this stuff. They hide not only behind your government officials, pulling the strings, but they actually really spiritually hide behind Jesus Christ and Christianity. And remember, there's a Jesuit behind every rock. They've infiltrated many Protestant churches. That's why there's no longer any protest. Well, we're going to continue to protest a bit. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.